Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today, Friday the 15th, Talent Talk. This one is very topical because it's really all about, what were the main takeaways and the main learnings from last week's In-House Recruitment Live event in London, which is a fantastic event. For me, you can always tell a great conference is that when the speaker sessions are on, the exhibition or the conference hall is empty because everybody is in and learning and listening to the speakers. And there was a fantastic range of speakers and some great topics. And on that, what I'd like to introduce and thank Alan Whitford for joining us today. Alan is a seasoned talent acquisition and recruitment expert with decades of domain experience, and what I thought would be a great thing to do today would be just to ask Alan from the keynote session, all the keynote sessions that Alan chaired at In-House Recruitment Live, what were the main things that he learned and the stuff that he found was new and interesting for all of you, and I will do the same from the disruptive tech session that I was involved in. So I'm going to introduce Alan in a second, but one thing I'd like everybody to do is I'd like everybody just to go to Google and search for Slido, S-L-I-D-O. Go to Slido. That will bring you to this page here, okay, where you can enter the event code. Now today's event code is hashtag Talent Talk, okay, so hashtag Talent Talk should take you to this screen here, okay, which is where you can post questions, and we will handle the questions at the end of the webinar session. We've only got half an hour, so we're going to move pretty quickly, okay. But we also have a number of polls, 3 poll questions that we're going to use in between there. So please go and ask. We've got a number of questions here already on Slido because we'll use this for the Q&A at the end, and we'll also use Slido to ask some polling questions to go through to get the kind of some additional information that we can use to ask Alan questions. So on that note, I'd like to just going to pass to Alan now. So as I said, Alan is key strategy consultant in recruitment challenges, talent acquisition, etc., kind of experience, and chaired the majority of the keynote sessions in the biggest room in In-House Recruitment Live. So Alan, delighted to hear what you learned from In-House Recruitment Live.
Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. By the way, you might want to just try and refresh your share screen, because at the moment, of all the people not to see the screen, that would be me. But in any case, yeah, In-House Recruitment Live, the whole group at the In-House Recruitment Network, and there we are, there's what I look like. It's a great event, and any of you that were there will have known there was a main auditorium session, another main sort of room for sessions, and then another sort of 3 rooms. So about 5 sessions going on concurrently at any one time. And as Scott has said, the interesting thing for me is always when there's nobody out in the hall and everybody was in the room. The other thing for me that indicates the quality of the conference was the amount of buzz we had and conversation we had before and after each session. And we certainly had some of that. We had some good questioners, including Scott was in a couple of the sessions, and was keeping me on my toes as the compare MC for the main auditorium. And I guess part of our theme today was about technology and the future of technology. We ran a panel discussion on that, as well as some main sessions. And I guess the first thing I would point out is that I've been around the technology space on this for over 20 years now. It's never about the tech. Yes, we love the tech, and we're going to talk about the tech and the cool things that tech can do. But if you haven't got your process sorted right, if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish as a business, then no matter what the tech is, I think you'll lose out. And to me, that was one of my takeaways. If we looked at the session right after lunch from Transport for London, where they had Charlotte, Amarit, and Jimmy, they talked about 3 different projects that they're working on at TfL, including the new Queen Elizabeth line, Crossrail. And each one of those, whether it was diversity or just talent branding or talent acquisition, In each one of those streams, they're using different pieces of technology, whether it's online video on YouTube, whether it's assessment tools, but ultimately it was still about how Transport for London was focused on their process and on their brand and on their engagement. And I think a lot of the questions we had, and Scott, you probably echo this, during the day were about engagement. I know it's an overused phrase, and it makes me almost want to go away and cry every time I hear somebody use it. But if we don't engage with our stakeholders by using our technology to move candidates through the process effectively, to keep them up to date, to allow them to provide responses to candidates, and if we don't keep engaged with the candidate by just basically responding, then we've lost one of the big pieces that technology can bring to us. From the very earliest applicant tracking systems, ATSs, CRMs, whatever we want to call it, that to me was always one of the key. Make sure you continue to communicate with the candidate. And I think we certainly saw that from the TFL presentation. I think another aspect of the technology was with Rick Sherlock of Microsoft's presentation, where they were really talking about the assessment side. How are they assessing people on a global basis to map against Microsoft's core competencies, but at the same time manage to customize that to local, national, and local environments. So they have a framework, they have a competency framework, but each one of those frameworks can be distributed out to those local hiring organizations, whether it's in Reading, or whether it's in Oxford, or whether it's in Belgium or France, can be then customized to fit the local requirements as well as the global requirements that a company like Microsoft has, particularly around those core personality traits, not just about skills, but it's about the personality. Do you fit into the Microsoft way of working? And one of the other things they were really challenging for and looking for is individuals that will push the envelope, that will challenge, that are not just going to be, just sitting in their square peg and square hole, but actually push that out a bit. So that's another side of technology, and it's one of those questions we'll come to in a little bit in our polling and our questions is assessment tools. I've seen some really great stuff using gamification in assessment tools, for example. What I would say was one of my favorite presentations was John Stanner's from Telefonica Alpha. A new term for me, they're in a moonshot business. What that is a startup within their overall business. They call it a moonshot because they're not sure if the business itself will take off. It's like taking a shot at the moon. They're also doing it in a stealth environment. They haven't launched this business officially, so they're trying to recruit people. So how do they use technology to do that? What were they looking for? What I found interesting is they also made some decisions about what it takes for them as a business. What are the kind of skills that they're looking for? And what they kind of called it is about team. They're about building teams. So they would go around to all of their existing people that they already had in the business and in other parts of the business, go, what makes a great team member for you? And, is it working on business change? Is it about engagement? What is it that makes that work for you? And they came up with 4 key elements called purpose, spirit, family, and engagement. And family being both the candidate's family, but also our new business as a family. And they looked at ways of measuring that, but also communicating those messages. So using social media, email blasts out to prospective candidates and saying, this is what our new business is going to be about. If this is interesting to you, if this strikes a button with you, let us know, and then we'll start the interview process. So using technology, what seems old world technology, email blast, but doing it very targeted and with very clear messaging about what it's about. And they had a huge take-up rate. It was about 70% of people responded to their emails. That's just enormous, just enormous. And the sort of final session in our group of one-on-ones was, of course, the infamous or famous, as you will, Google Dave Chislehurst. He's always worth good value in terms of being very energetic. But what I found interesting is that his thing, again, not just about the tech, and if you've ever looked at what Dave and his company do, they do some amazing analytics of people's behavior online. And they can really get right under covers of where your current employees are, what they're doing, where your prospective candidates are, what are they doing, what are their interests. Get away from things like just Facebook or LinkedIn. Get out to other channels where you might find them. But what he really talked about, and it kind of echoed a bit what John had talked about, was developing personas. Taking those stories of your existing employees, and this is really building what your employment brand is, and then using video to get those personas across. And he had some great examples from SAP that Matt Jeffrey's been working on. So technology backs it up in terms of the research, in terms of the analytics of what they're looking for in their business, but then delivering that through very cool interactive video platforms. So to me, those were the key takeaways from the primary speakers. The other piece we did look at with the panel was about, what is the future of recruitment and what's the future of technology? And I thought there was an interesting poll that read.co.uk did where they were trying to assess who uses tech. And interestingly, they looked at that at the supermarket checkout queue. Do you use the manned, checkout queue, or do you go to the one where you can self-checkout? And interestingly, what was really interesting is that more than 60% of people prefer to use a checkout with an actual person. They wanted the human contact, even though the unmanned checkout booths were open and easy to use. So the 72% of people actually did prefer, that have been were preferring the manned checkouts. So I found that very interesting. And other than that, I think in that tech discussion, future tech, to be honest, I wasn't greatly surprised. We did have one good question from the audience, which was ask the panel if they had to pick a technology to invest in, what would they invest in? And Katrina Collier, who is, really knows the whole social element and knows quite a bit about tech. You know what? Interestingly enough, Scott, she highlighted candidate ID, didn't she?
Yeah, no, she did, which was, well, yeah, I mean, which was a huge accolade and very encouraging. But yeah, it was a bit of a shock when she did that. Hey, brilliant, Alan. That is that? If you get anything closing comments, or?
I'd say that's a quick whiz through, but I'm interested to see what our viewers have got in terms of any questions, and I think you've got a couple neat polls that you want to run as well. And I stayed away from the disruptive technology because I know you're going to talk about that because you were in that stream.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm going to come on but it's really going to echo a lot of the thoughts that you made. But the first thing is what I want to do now is let's go to our first poll. Okay, so everybody who's attending hopefully has got the Slido page open and can go to polls, and the poll will be live, so they can vote on how they would describe their current recruitment process. Now, whether that is reliance on what we call the dependency triplets, currently reliant on, it's very short-term focused. It is it's about job boards, it's about advertising, third-party networks. So it's a long manual hiring process. They've got to educate the candidates. It's easy to find candidates, but it's difficult to respond, so they can't get enough high-quality candidates to support the business. Or B, which is, I guess, a more strategic approach where you're filling vacancies and building pipelines at the same time. You own your own database of qualified and engaged candidates. You've got a strong pipeline of talent for tomorrow's hiring needs and short hiring processes. So, A or B, please keep voting.
Yeah, it's a bit like a horse race here, running about 50-50.
Yeah, we got 8. Okay, and encouragingly, we've got lots of people who are on top.
B starting nose ahead, which is what we would hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent. So so let's close that poll. Any comment on that, Alan?
No, as I said, it's encouraging. 2 to 1 in terms of what we would hope it would be. It's just slipped a little bit. I would say I hope that that's not just aspirational answering, but that it's actual real. This is where people's experiences really are. And that's not to say that the A method is necessarily wrong. It depends on your business and what kind of roles you're trying to fill. But we would hope that people are working a bit more forward thinking and trying to get to some people in advance.
Okay, so second poll, same task, is that poll should be live now for people to go. Okay, so in terms of specifically engaging candidates, and engagement was a big theme at the conference, so the #1 engagement challenge that we have is that the tools we have available to help us engage candidates on the right channels at the right moment with the right comment is, so the challenge is either A, B, or C. Get voting.
It's an interesting question about the tools being too complex. Typically, what that says to me, if we get a few answers in that one, is that the client hasn't potentially engaged well enough with the supplier in terms of training, or they may have done good training at the beginning, but you've had some churn in your recruitment department or HR department, and the new people coming in don't actually know how to use the tools. The other area that may just be that we haven't, as you see, C seems to be leading here at the moment. We don't have the ability. Again, to me, that's a training element, because none of the tools for candidate engagement are necessarily all that complex. But people issue, that's always one that comes up, isn't it?
Yep. Great. So yeah, I mean, again, that is, we talk about it, and I think this echoes a lot of what Transport for London were talking around. Was probably all the tools are there to enable you to do the job. They might be kind of disparate or not joined up, and some of them might be a little harder to run than the rest of them, but the technology will be there. I'm sure that there's a heck of a lot that can be improved in the technology, but actually it's more about the people and the processes and the training and the ability to get the right people in the right roles. So okay, so let's move to the last poll, which is, in terms of the decision-making process, who in your organization owns the budget and has the decision-making authority for actually purchasing recruitment tools? A, finance, B, IT, C, HRD, D, head of talent, and E, I don't have budget. So please vote.
And you could tell this is a question that came from me, having been a vendor myself in the past. I've been on both sides of that buying stroke selling equation. And certainly for me as selling technology, it was always a big challenge, because it was difficult to ascertain in an organization who says they have the decision-making process and then where it finally really ends up. And I was actually pleasantly surprised at In-House Recruitment Live when I asked the audience during one session how many actually had budget for recruitment, and about 2/3 of the audience actually were very affirmative about that. So that, to me, was that was pleasant to see that. Interesting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of echoed in. I mean, it's a small polling number, but what we are seeing encouragingly is that actually the talent acquisition department has the authority and the budget for the tools that it needs. Sometimes it's HR, quarter of the time it's HRD, and less of the time it's finance, but encouragingly 0% of the time it's IT.
Yeah, that's really a surprise to me. That is really a surprise to me.
Great. Okay. So, right. Let's move off. Thank you very much for the poll. Some great insights there. Now, what I want to do in the second half of the webinar is really I'm just going to I'm going to skip through very quickly the presentation that we talked about when the disruptive technology piece, but also then just come back and summarize what were the main kind of learnings from that session there. So we very much looked at how can you create talent pipelines which will cut your time and therefore your cost to shortlist by 50%. We looked at a case study that we'd used with Dialog Semiconductor, where it was about software engineers across analog, digital applications and CAD. We talked about the fact that really there were about, you know, in the UK there alone, there are about 500 people that they thought could do that specific role, and a lot of what they'd been doing before was all around net fishing, and they would describe that as, when we talk about that, as like, so these are all the fish in the sea that are their total addressable market, and really what they want to do is they want to is attract them into their net, but the only tools that they really have available at doing that is you know, what they're currently doing from a recruitment marketing point of view, and pulling people out of the ATS and batch and blast mailing to them, and so some of that will mean that a proportion of that swims into their net, actually kind of engages and responds to that activity, but generally those tend to be the kind of lower quality people, but it could be quite a lot, or it could be quite a few, but you're really struggling for the high caliber candidates. So how do you engage, you know, the bigger passive market? How do you get them into your net, and how do you identify the ones that are really interested in talking to you now? Because one of the biggest problems with net fishing, or what you would call best practice kind of recruitment at the moment, is that the definition of success is a big catch, because in that big catch there will be the really big fish that you want to spear. But imagine if you could identify those you know, those really big fish automatically. So they were the ones that you would focus on, and they were the ones that you would point and you would focus all of your expensive human recruiter resources, which is always the most expensive part of the recruitment exercises. Just point the people at the things and focus them on doing the things that, you know, what they do best, and only then they can do is, you know, getting on the phone, building relationships, to getting stories and conversations going, and then moving towards conversion and hire. So we looked a little bit at, okay, this is what, you know, we're all as individuals, we're all self-educating and self-directing now in all of our complex kind of decisions, whether it's buying a car, and, you know, moving jobs, changing career is a big complex decision. So that you can break that down into steps, okay, and you know, from an initial trigger point through to awareness, and then education and learning, and then consideration, and then there's what Dave describes as the ZMOT, which I love, which is the zero moment of truth, and then, you know, once from there. So what's really changed is that everybody can now do that on their own. They can find out about organizations, they can find out, you know, where they're headed in their industry, how they're positioned in their industry, strategically what the CEO says, and they can get past that, is this sound like a good organization for me in my career? And then they can go to the next stage, which is really, what would it be like to work there? You know, what is the culture like? What are the people like? Who's the hiring manager? What would he be like to work for? And yeah, I can do all of that. Yes, this looks good. And then I can go and find out, right, what are they offering me? What are they what specific benefits do they offer? What do the roles look like? What do the actual opportunities look like? And they will do all of that on their own now before they will engage with recruitment teams. So huge issue when candidates are self-educating, because they just don't engage with organizations until they want to on their terms. So that's the first big dynamic. The second big dynamic is that we're moving increasingly into a very competitive environment for the best talent. You know, more than 60–70% of the roles that were advertised last year by the FTSE 100 company are for the same 21 people. Okay, so everybody's chasing a smaller and smaller group. Demand is outstripping supply. It's also really easy to apply. So organizations are getting flooded with applications that are low quality. So how, in the context of all those kind of three big things, how is it that you can adapt to this, and at the same time as adapting that, also do it in a way that enables you to lead the conversation and to nurture people through their decision-making journey, and then identify who are the tiny 3 to 4% of people that are actually ready for a hiring conversation today, because one, they meet your hiring criteria, and two, they've demonstrated with their behavior, their engagement with you, that they're actually really interested in working for you. And that's what we call spearfishing. So we looked at where people typically start, which we call dirty, you know, which is dear, inefficient, reactive, tactical, and inadequate. Or Adam will talk about it as a sort of heroin dependency or dependency, on the dependency triplets. And we really looked about what people are currently doing at the moment, which is net fishing. This is Dialogue's kind of example. And then we looked at how in detail at how they then went on to adapt. We looked at the type of content that candidates want at each of the stage. We looked at how you can, put a powerful scoring algorithm underneath that to identify where people are in their journey, so that you're only really focusing up in this top right quadrant. Okay, and we looked at how the difference between that approach and the CRM-driven approach. And we looked at the results, which was kind of after week 1, 57% of the talent community, if you like, the talent pool, and the talent pool came out of their ATS. It was 2,993 from their ATS, which we refreshed and brought up to date. It was global, so 57% were active. 103 were actually hire ready, had already kind of demonstrated, by the content that they'd engaged with, on the career. 5, which was the end of the campaign, and we had 81% active. 363 hire ready, 342 already in conversation, and 10 screening interviews. So just off a relatively simple exercise, some really powerful results. Making sure that you use technology so that you're building a candidate first, so it loads fast and it looks great on a smartphone, and making sure that you do it in a way that is already automatically GDPR compliant. So that was very much what. Right, I'm just going to go to. That was very much kind of what I covered in my session, and one of the key things, well, I guess the 2 or 3 big things that came out of the disruptive technology session in the main was one question around, so what will the impact of technology be on talent acquisition or recruitment? Okay, is it going to be small? Is it going to be big? And the discussion in the room was very much around, hey, look, it's still going to be huge. I mean, I would say that about 80% of the discussions and the buzz around last Tuesday were around technology and tech and what's it going to do. There's so much of the talent acquisition or recruitment process that is still done manually. There's so many tasks that that humans are doing that technology could do just much. That whole idea of is how do we focus the expensive humans on doing things that only they can do. The second big area was around, kind of what are the challenges of making the technologies work. Vendors have got a habit of over-promising, and the tools are not fit for purpose. And that whole idea of which we talk a lot about of, a fool with a tool is still a fool. Okay, if you're just relying on the technology to be a silver bullet, then it's not going to work. Okay, you need new skills. You need to understand your processes. You need to understand the workflow, and then once you have that, you can understand what are the right products. Okay, how do we customize them? What integrations do we need? And therefore, then what ongoing training is it that we need? So there was a lot of discussion around that. So what I'd like to do now, Alan, is let's jump to the questions. So I'd like everybody to go to Slido, and if you'd like to post a question, we've got a number of kind of questions there from from different people, but please add your questions in there and we will just take them. You can also vote for questions, and they will automatically kind of rise to the top. So I'm going to start with this one here from you, Alan. Okay, so is technology really a difference maker to antiquated recruitment processes?
Yeah, and you can tell this was my question as I threw a few in here, because last year when I was presenting at a conference, I pulled out my 1997 slides, which showed the manual recruitment process and then where technology would impact each side of that recruiting process. And the funny thing is, it's still relevant today, but the sadder part about it is that it really showcased what 20 years ago when we were building these first ATSs, all we were really trying to do was automate the current process. And if you automate a bad process, you've just got a faster, slicker, bad process. So the question for me is that technology doesn't make a difference to the process unless you sit back, evaluate, and think, do I really need to do 5 interviews? Do I really need to have those 9 pieces of paper? What is it I really need to be doing? And there are a couple examples in the US of companies who have skipped the traditional application form completely, and they just go straight into interview mode. Let's find out about you. Are you interested? And I think Panera Breads is one of those examples where they've bypassed that lengthy, pain in the neck recruitment, application form that nobody likes. So from their view, technology was get rid of the stuff we don't need, and I used to call that use technology to get rid of administrivia, the trivial bits of admin that we really don't want to do.
Yep, great. Okay, I've got another. So we've got some great ones here. So here's one from Andy. With so many disruptive technologies, how can organizations align them to obtain real value?
Well, first thing is we'll probably, debate with Andy whether there are really truly disruptive technologies as far as recruitment's concerned. I would say that in the agency world, agencies pick up on those tools much, much quicker than we do in the corporate world. The disruptive technology for corporate recruiting, which is taking longer to get to than we thought it would, is mobile. The candidates live, breathe, want to be on their mobile. They want to do as much as possible on the mobile. And as an industry, it's taken us an awful long time to figure out how to allow them to apply via mobile, and then how do we integrate the mobile piece from job boards, for example, into our ATSs. There is no real reason to not be able to integrate a lot of technology. There's a great organization out there called hrxml.org. I was involved in it when it first came into Europe as the HRXML consortium that allows you to take your HR and recruiting products and have them talk to each other much more effectively.
Wow. So I'm going to jump to this. We've got 2 on the same topic. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 on the same topic. But I'm going to go with this one from Andy, which is, so how proven are the gamification assessment tools in terms of predicting success? And I think there's a I know there's a story with Google where they looked at all of the they basically looked at all this amazing process that they'd that they'd engineered and thought about, and they used some great tools within it, and then they said, okay, we're going to test this, and they split them into 2 halves, and actually the results were equal. So how proven? So how proven are the gamification assessment tools in terms of predicting success?
So Andy, and thanks for your questions, Andy. I'd break that into 2 parts. Take out the gamification part of that question first, and how proven are assessment tools in terms of predicting success is the first question. And if you go back a few years, it was a technology company that I helped bring into the UK called Provisor. They actually would spend 2 to 3 years with a client, and they would actually go back in year after year and evaluate the successful candidates, the quality of candidates back against the original testing that they'd gone through, and then basically review and revamp the testing on an annual basis. So their assessment tools were very good in terms of predicting behavior. Unfortunately for us, Provisor got bought by another company, which then got bought by another company that's now kind of disappeared. Now we'll add the gamification piece back in, and I've done some work with a company called Pimetrics. There's 2 or 3 others out there now doing gamification tools for assessment. And let me raise my hand here and say that I've always been a skeptic about assessment tools anyway. But when I first got in contact with Provisor, I went through their tools, and in about 20-25 minutes, you play 4 games on your laptop. And then you hit give me my report, and it kicks out a report. And it scared the heck out of me because it said the field that I was most suited to be in was HR and recruitment. Now, that scared the heck out of me. That looked like that was a pretty good predictive tool. So I think they are getting more and more accurate, particularly as we look at the stuff that we talked about earlier in the session, that people like, John Stanners and what Dave Hazelhurst was talking about. If you're looking more about that fit to your business, if you're looking more about not just a personality profile, but the persona of what it is to work in our business, these types of tools actually, I think, are going to have a lot more success because they're assessing people on what it's really like to work here. But it does come back down to, as it would with any assessment tool, don't just take a generic off-the-shelf tool. You really need to spend time normalizing it and norming it to your business.
Brilliant. So I think we're going to let's do one more, and it will I mean, people will look at this in two ways, whether this is going to be, reduce the number of people working in recruitment, or refocus the skills of people working in recruitment, and it's all to do with around artificial intelligence. So will bots and artificial intelligence replace recruiters?
Yeah, and I put that up. Now, bots are interesting. We all love them if we're on a website and we say, hey, talk to us. I use a tool to do back-end cleaning of my Mac. And this tool, when you pull it up, it gives you an option to talk to the tech guy, right? And this is supposed to be you're talking to a real person. Well, the interesting thing is if I put it on mine, or I use it on my mother's, or I use it on my partner's computer, it's the same picture, and it's the same guy. So I know that's not a real person. I know it's a bot. They're trying to tell me it's a real person. So there's a bit of that questioning. I read a really great quote this morning from John Sumser out of the U.S. If you've never looked up this stuff, check him out. It's John, S-U-M-S-E-R. John has been writing about and been involved in recruitment for longer than I have, which is saying a lot. He posed a really good question this morning about AI, and I'll just read this to you. If someone is talking about the AI and their HR tech or recruiting product, they're telling you about how it was built rather than what it really does. Don't you wish they'd spend more time describing its value to you? So I think that pushes back on us as vendors. And I sold the first ATS with artificial intelligence back in 20 years ago. And I was as guilty as the next man because we so loved our tech that we had half a dozen slides just about how our AI worked. And I couldn't make a presentation, according to my CEO, if I didn't put those slides in. But if you're in a room with HR and recruiters, by slide 2, they're nodding off. And by slide 3, they're walking out the door. So as a vendor community, we need to really think much more about that. The word AI, the word chatbots and bots, and this stuff just gets thrown into the conversation because it's today's currency, right? Augmented reality. After the Apple launch this week, is there anybody out there that isn't trying to figure out how am I going to use augmented reality in my recruitment on my phone? Right?
I think that is an absolutely great point that relates to anybody that's involved in a complex decision-making process. Okay, you look across at sales and marketing and business to business, and they've gone through this whole transformation where they've actually suddenly realized is that buyers buy, sellers don't sell. So there's no point in telling them about features. What they want is benefits. It's they want to know, what is this going to do for me? And if you then come across into recruitment and talent acquisition, where you are also, trying to interest people in a proposition that is a complex proposition because it's about them changing job and it's about them moving career and things. So it's got to be about, this is, these are the emotional or the rational and the benefits for why we think that you would want to come and work here. It's not that we've got a job and these are the specifics. It's you have to tell them a story that's much more kind of about the organization, about what it believes, and about the culture of what it's like to work there.
You're right, and I think both Dave and in his stuff talking about the artificial intelligence they use in terms of how they're assessing massive amounts of data to try and come down to those key points and key knowledge points about a candidate and about the company itself are important. But I would say, in my mind, Katrina Collier, who was on the panel in her earlier session, I think she had a great line that relates, in one sense, to everything we've been talking about today. It takes more than tech to #BeHuman.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a great line, and I think that on that line, it takes more than tech to be to be human. I'd like to thank you, Alan, for your time to join us today and summarize what was a great conference last week. We will make the on-demand version to everybody who who signed up to watch the webinar, and we'll get that out middle of next week. But Alan, thanks again. Have a great Friday and a great weekend, and really valuable listening to your thoughts.
Well, it's been great. Appreciate you inviting me on, and thanks everybody for listening. And by all means, feel free to contact us in all the usual ways. So we're happy to talk to you.
Brilliant. Have a great day. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.